A billionaire storms into his nursery after hearing whispers about his black maid tying up his baby. He explodes with arrogance, convinced it's abuse. But the calm dignity of the maid and the traditional African rap she uses sets the stage for a clash of culture, pride, and prejudice. A shocking moment leaves the room frozen. Just before a life-altering reveal, "We don't treat children like animals in this house." The billionaire's voice tore through the polished oak hallway like a whip crack. His words carried the heavy disdain of a man unaccustomed to being questioned, a man who believed his rules were law. The setting was his grand nursery, ivory walls, shelves stacked with handcrafted toys, a crystal chandelier that glowed with sterile perfection. Everything screamed wealth, yet beneath the glitter of luxury there lingered something colder, arrogance that coated the air like smoke dot at the center of the room. Nia, the maid, stood quietly with his infant son. Her deep brown hands moved gracefully, securing the baby against her back with a vibrant kente cloth, patterned gold, red, and green threads interwoven like a living story. Her face was calm, though the storm around her raged. The billionaire's wife hovered in the doorway, lips pressed tight, unsure if she should intervene. A butler froze near the wall, pretending to polish silver, but his eyes betrayed curiosity. The entire household was watching. "You tied him." The billionaire spat, jabbing an accusing finger toward the cloth. "What kind of barbaric nonsense is this? Do you think my son is livestock to be bound like that?" Nia did not flinch. Her back was straight, her voice steady, her eyes soft, but unyielding. "This is not tying," she said quietly. "This is carrying. This is love." The words hit like a ripple, unsettling in their simplicity. But the billionaire's pride refused to bend. His jaw tightened, his blue eyes narrowed with fury. "I pay you to care for him, not to parade your traditions in my house," he snapped. "Remove him, now, before I call someone else to show you how civilized people raise a child." A hush fell over the room. The baby stirred, cooing softly, his tiny hand curling against Nia's shoulder as though he already knew her. Heartbeat was a safer rhythm than the rage echoing across the nursery. The symbolism was undeniable. The innocence of a child clinging to the one person being treated as lesser. Nia took a slow breath. With deliberate calm, she pulled the cloth's knot tighter, not looser, letting the baby rest more securely against her. The bold defiance was not loud, not violent, but it was unshakable. A murmur rippled from the butler, quickly silenced when the billionaire's glare caught him. "You dare?" The billionaire barked. His voice was rising, echoing in the gilded nursery like thunder. "You dare defy me in my own house?" Nia finally lifted her gaze to meet his directly. Her eyes carried the weight of generations, steady as stone, unbroken. "By wealth or threat?" "Sir," she said, voice clear and unwavering, "sometimes the child of a king is safest in the arms of a servant." The words struck with surgical precision. The billionaire staggered half a step back, not physically but in pride. His hand hovered mid-air as though he'd thought of ripping the cloth from her himself, but now even that gesture felt small, inadequate against the gravity of what she'd said. The chandelier's crystals caught the light at that moment, scattering fragments of gold across the walls, as if the room itself leaned in to witness. For the first time in years, silence pinned the billionaire. His mouth opened but no words came. Only his breathing, sharp, uneven, betrayed the collapse beginning inside him. The baby sighed, settling deeper into Nia's back, eyes drifting shut in absolute peace. The contrast was undeniable. Where the billionaire's wealth brought tension, her tradition brought rest. And then a sound broke through the air. The creak of the nursery door opening wider. "Darling," came a voice, smooth and commanding. It was not his wife. The billionaire froze. His face drained of color, because standing there, just beyond the threshold, was someone whose presence could unravel every certainty he held about culture, class, and control. "Darling, what on earth is going on here?" The voice was smooth yet commanding, resonating with quiet authority. Everyone turned. In the doorway stood Charles Whitaker, a close family friend and chairman of the hospital board where the billionaire held influence. His presence was heavy, not because of wealth alone, but because he carried the weight of credibility. He was the kind of man whose word could shape reputations, whose judgments lingered long after the room emptied. The billionaire stiffened, his anger freezing. Mid-motion. "Charles," he said quickly, forcing his tone into polished civility, "I didn't realize you'd arrived." Charles's eyes, cool and deliberate, moved from the furious billionaire to the composed maid with the baby resting peacefully on her back. His gaze lingered there, as if absorbing the quiet power of the scene before him. "Arrived just in time." "It seems," Charles replied. He stepped into the nursery, his footsteps echoing against the marble. "I couldn't help overhearing. Sounded rather medieval, the way you shouted." The billionaire's jaw clenched. He turned toward Nia, his pride unwilling to bow before either her or his guest. "This woman," he snapped, "was restraining my son. Look at him. Tied up like some, but—" Charles raised a hand, silencing him without effort. His voice was calm, but its edge carried steel. "He doesn't look restrained. He looks safe." The baby stirred as though in agreement, letting out a small sigh before nestling back into slumber. The moment was almost poetic. Nia remained silent, her dignity louder than any defense she could have spoken. "You don't understand." The billionaire pressed, his face reddening. This tradition, this," he gestured at the kente cloth like it was a crime scene. "It has no place here. My son deserves better than this primitive display." Charles's brows furrowed, his voice low. "Primitive or practical?" He walked closer, studying the intricate folds of the wrap. "Do you even know how many cultures carry their children this way? Do you know what it means for a child to feel the heartbeat of the one carrying them?" The billionaire faltered. Words tangled on his tongue. He had not expected his guest to side with the maid. "Don't romanticize it," he snapped finally. "This is about standards, civilized standards." "My family," Charles cut him off with a sharp glance. "Civilization isn't built by silencing traditions you don't understand. It's built by learning which of them hold truth." The room grew still again. The butler swallowed hard, shifting his gaze to the floor. The billionaire's wife exhaled softly, as though grateful someone had said what she dared not. Nia adjusted her stance, the baby snug against her back, then spoke for the first time since the interruption. "In my village, sir, we say a child who is carried close learns the world is not something to fear." Her words floated into the nursery, simple yet profound. The baby cooed in sleep, his small voice punctuating her truth. The billionaire clenched, his fists at his sides. Rage simmered inside him, but something else slipped in alongside it, doubt. And doubt was more dangerous than fury, because it cracked the walls he had spent years building around his authority. "You're telling me," he said, his voice lower now, "that this," he jabbed at the cloth again, though with less certainty, "is somehow better than what generations of my family have done?" Charles's answer was slow, deliberate. "I'm telling you that perhaps the world is bigger than your family." The billionaire's breath hitched. The words landed like stones. Bigger than his family. Bigger than his wealth. His eyes flickered toward his wife, who avoided his gaze. Toward the butler, who looked as though he'd rather vanish. Finally, toward Nia, who stood calm, unshaken, carrying not just a baby but an entire heritage on her back. For the first time, the billionaire realized the room was no longer his. He was the loudest voice, but not the strongest presence. Still, his pride clawed for control. "Enough of this nonsense," he growled, though the bite in his tone was dulled. "If she insists on flaunting her traditions, then she can do it. Somewhere else, not in my house." Nia's eyes did not flinch. "This house is where your child sleeps," she said softly. "And right now, he is sleeping without fear." The chandelier crystals trembled as if the house itself had heard, and in that moment, Charles's voice landed the final blow. "Perhaps the problem, my friend, is not the way the child is carried, but the way you carry your pride." The billionaire froze, his authority slipping like sand between clenched fists. The silence that followed was deafening and dangerous, because silence meant everyone had seen him falter. And for a man like him, that was the beginning of collapse. The study smelled of leather and cigars, though the billionaire had lit neither. He sat hunched at his mahogany desk, fingers drumming against polished wood, replaying the nursery scene in his mind. The word still burned. Perhaps the problem is the way you carry your pride. He clenched his jaw, staring at the family portraits that lined the wall. Generations of Whitmores looked down at him, stern men in suits, women posed in velvet gowns, all framed in gold. They were his lineage, his proof of status. And yet, tonight, their painted eyes seemed to judge him instead of honor him. "That woman will not embarrass me again," he muttered under his breath. "Not in my house, not with my child." The door creaked softly. His wife, Eleanor, entered, her silk gown whispering across the carpet. She carried herself with the poise of someone who had learned long ago not to rattle the cage of his temper. "You were cruel," she said quietly, standing near the fireplace. His head snapped up. "Cruel, Eleanor?" She tied our son like a sack of grain. And Charles, his face twisted at the memory. Charles dared to side with her, in my home. Eleanor's voice remained calm, but her eyes were firm. "Our son was sleeping peacefully. He has never rested like that in my arms." The words hit deeper than he expected. He shoved back from the desk, pacing. "So you're against me now, too? You'd rather believe her superstitions than the way civilized families raise children?" "I'd rather believe what I see," she answered. Her defiance was quiet but sharp. He had no reply. Silence stretched between them until the faint cry of the baby drifted through the corridor. The sound stilled them both. Eleanor turned to leave, but before she could, another sound followed. A lullaby. Low, steady, in a language Eleanor did not know. Nia's voice carrying through the house like a gentle stream over stones. Baby's cries faded almost instantly. The billionaire's chest tightened. He despised how quickly the child quieted. For her, how natural it sounded. He despised the peace of it. "She has bewitched this house," he whispered bitterly. Eleanor shot him a look. "No, darling, she has given it something you cannot buy." Her words were a dagger he refused to acknowledge. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, though her absence left the room colder when she slipped out. Alone, he returned to his desk. His mind raced. He could dismiss Nia, that much was easy. Fire her immediately, send her back to wherever she came from. But then, the baby. The staff had seen. Charles had seen. Even Eleanor had spoken against him. The billionaire gripped his whiskey glass so tightly it nearly cracked. "No," he thought. "I'll do more than dismiss her. I'll prove she's unfit." He envisioned a scandal, perhaps accusations of neglect, of ignorance, of danger to the child. Something that would strip her of dignity and ensure no one ever questioned his judgment again. The idea hardened in him like steel, but even as he plotted, the house betrayed him. From the hallway came a faint sound, laughter, soft, bubbling, innocent, the baby's laugh. He froze. Slowly, he rose and moved toward the door, opening it. Just enough to peer down the corridor. There was Nia, swaying gently, the baby secure on her back. She carried a basket of folded laundry, balancing weight and child as though it were second nature. With each step, she hummed that same lullaby, and the baby giggled, his tiny hands patting her shoulders in joy. The billionaire's breath caught. His son, his heir, looked happier in her arms than he ever had in his. Something cracked inside him. A soundless fracture, invisible but real. For the first time, he wondered if wealth and legacy were powerless against something as simple as the heartbeat of a woman he considered beneath him. He slammed the study door shut, leaning against it as though to block the vision out. His pulse hammered in his ears. "Tomorrow," he vowed aloud, "she's gone. And everyone will see her for what she is." But deep inside, a whisper he couldn't silence rose against his vow. "Or will they see you for what you are?" The chandelier in the hallway swayed slightly, though no wind had passed. And in the silence that followed, the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath. Morning light spilled across the marble floors of the mansion, but inside the billionaire's chest the storm had only grown darker. He had spent a restless night, replaying every detail of the confrontation, the maid's unflinching calm, Charles's rebuke, Eleanor's quiet defiance. All of it gnawed at him like rats on stone. By breakfast, his decision was made. Nia would not simply be dismissed. She would be humiliated, revealed, undone. "Call Dr. Kensington," he ordered the butler, his voice sharp as glass. "Have him come at once." The butler hesitated. Sir, the pediatrician? Yes. Tell him I need an evaluation. A professional opinion on this. He gestured vaguely with disgust. This nonsense with cloths and carrying. The butler bowed his head, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed something more. Doubt. By noon, the doctor arrived. Dr. Kensington was tall, gray-haired, polished in his manner, the sort of man the billionaire trusted because he belonged to the same circles, the same clubs. Surely, he thought, the doctor would validate his outrage. The nursery was staged like a trial. Nia stood quietly, the baby wrapped against her back, humming as she tidied toys. Eleanor lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed, her silence like a verdict already cast. Charles had not returned since last night, but his words still hovered. Like smoke in the air. Doctor, the billionaire began, voice booming. I've called you here to witness something unacceptable. This woman, my maid, has been binding my son like an animal. Look at him. This can't possibly be safe. Doctor. Kensington adjusted his spectacles and stepped closer, his gaze moving not to the billionaire but to the child. The baby blinked up at him with wide eyes, then yawned and nestled deeper into the cloth. His tiny hand reached out, patting Nia's shoulder with sleepy contentment. The doctor murmured. Interesting. Interesting? The billionaire barked. It's dangerous, primitive. Tell her to stop immediately. But the doctor did not answer him. Instead, he looked at Nia. May I? He asked gently. Nia nodded, loosening the cloth just enough to show how securely the baby was positioned. She demonstrated the folds, the knots, the way the fabric supported without constriction. Her movements were confident, practiced. A choreography passed through generations. The doctor observed closely, then smiled. Fascinating. Remarkably ergonomic. The child's posture is excellent. Breathing unimpeded. Secure, yet comfortable. The billionaire's face darkened. You can't be serious. Oh, I am quite serious, Dr. Kensington replied. He adjusted his spectacles again, eyes bright with interest. In fact, I've seen studies. Babies carried this way often develop stronger bonds, less anxiety. I dare say it's healthier than many of the contraptions wealthy families purchase these days. The words struck like thunder. Eleanor's lips curved in the faintest smile. The butler, standing near the door, lowered his gaze to hide his smirk. Billionaire's hands clenched. You're saying this, he nearly spat the word, is better than tradition? Better than what my family has always done? I'm saying, the doctor replied evenly, that wisdom doesn't always wear a tuxedo. Sometimes it wears cloth. Nia tied the wrap again with silent grace. The baby, lulled by her heartbeat, drifted into sleep once more. The room filled with a peace that wealth had never purchased. The billionaire's pride buckled. He felt the ground shifting beneath him, his authority eroding like sand under a tide he could not control. This is absurd, he muttered, pacing like a caged animal. Absurd! You're all blinded by sentiment. But no one met his eyes. The doctor scribbled notes. Eleanor's gaze lingered softly on her son, and even the butler seemed anchored in quiet respect for the maid. For the first time, the billionaire realized he was not the center of the room. He tried again, louder, desperate. Do you not see? She is nothing, a servant. She doesn't belong here. At that, Nia finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried like a bell. Your son seems to disagree. Every head turned toward the baby, resting in utter serenity. His breath steady against her back. The billionaire's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His fury had no weapon sharp enough to pierce that truth. The silence stretched until it broke on its own with the baby's sigh, long and content, as though sealing the argument without a word. The doctor closed his notebook, nodding. Mr. Whitmore, I'd advise you to consider what truly serves your child, not just your pride. That's my professional opinion. And just like that, the trial ended, not with Nia's disgrace, but with his. The billionaire stood frozen, humiliated. In his own house, while the maid he sought to destroy gained respect he could not buy. The mansion, once a fortress of his authority, had turned into a hall of whispers. Every corridor seemed alive with murmurs, though voices hushed the moment the billionaire entered. Servants who once bowed deeply now moved silently, avoiding. His eyes it was not open rebellion, not yet, but it was a subtle shift, the kind that gnawed at him worse than open defiance. Respect, he realized, was slipping through his fingers. Eleanor's quiet disapproval only sharpened the wound. She had not spoken of the doctor's visit since, but her eyes said enough. They no longer carried fear of his temper, only disappointment. A far heavier weight at dinner, he tried to reclaim control. The long oak table glittered with silverware and candlelight, but conversation was muted. He set down his glass of wine with deliberate force. "This ends now," he declared. "Tomorrow Nia leaves. I will not have my household ruled by superstition and spectacle." The butler froze mid-step. Eleanor lowered her gaze but did not object. Even the baby, resting in a cradle near the table, stirred as though sensing. The tension but then laughter. Not mocking, but bright, innocent. The child had woken and was laughing, reaching out toward Nia, who stood quietly at the corner with folded linens. The billionaire's words cracked in his throat. The symbolism was unbearable. His heir, his legacy, reaching not for him. Not for Eleanor, but for her. "Take him," Eleanor said softly, nodding toward Nia, and before he could object, Nia lifted the baby into her arms. Instantly, the child nestled against her shoulder. Giggling in that unguarded way only children know, the billionaire's chest burned. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. "Enough," he growled, but his voice carried. Less command than desperation. The next day, his fury sought an outlet outside the mansion. At the gentlemen's club, among marble busts and leather chairs, he recounted the insult he had endured. She tied him with cloth, he told the others, his voice heavy with disdain. Like some peasant tradition. I summoned a doctor, and even he praised it. He expected laughter, agreement, outrage. Instead, the men exchanged uncertain glances. One cleared his throat. "Actually, Whitmore, I've read something." "Similar," said Mr. Halston, a banker with a habit of parroting fashionable trends. "Something about skin-to-skin bonding. European mothers are beginning to experiment with such things." Another nodded. Yes. "I heard it's healthier for development." "Makes sense, really." The billionaire's stomach twisted. "You're siding with her too? A maid? Over me?" No one answered. The silence was worse than mockery. In their silence, he heard his authority crumble. By the time he returned home, his anger was no longer hot but cold, simmering like embers waiting for fuel. He entered the nursery, determined to confront Nia directly. She was there, as always. The baby secure against her back, humming a song so soft it seemed woven from the air itself. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "You think you've won, don't you?" he hissed. Nia turned calmly, her eyes steady. "This isn't about winning. It's about what the child needs." The baby stirred, yawning, then rested again with complete trust. The billionaires. Words faltered. He wanted to shout, to rip the cloth away, to prove his dominance, but his hands froze mid-air. Something about the way the child clung to her, the way his tiny hand gripped the fabric. It disarmed him. He lowered his voice, but venom still dripped. "You've poisoned this house. You've turned them against me, my wife, my staff. Even my friends doubt me now. But mark my words, woman, this ends with you gone." Nia did not move. She did not flinch. She only whispered, "Perhaps it begins with you seeing." The words stung like fire. "Seeing? Seeing what?" But before he could demand an answer, the baby let out a sudden laugh, clear, unrestrained, echoing through the nursery like sunlight breaking storm clouds. The billionaire froze. His rage collided with something he could not name, and in that moment, though he refused to admit it, he felt the walls of his own empire bending against him. The storm broke in the drawing room. The billionaire stood tall, his suit pressed sharp, his voice booming off the gilded walls. Eleanor sat stiffly on the sofa. The butler hovered in the background, and Nia stood near the window with the baby sleeping soundly against her back. "This ends tonight," the billionaire declared. "You will no longer use that cloth. You will no longer parade your customs under my roof. From now on, you will do things our way." "My way." The command hung heavy in the air, Nia did not flinch. She shifted slightly, rocking the baby with a subtle sway, her eyes steady and unshaken. The golden sunset poured through the window, catching the bright patterns of the kente wrap, the colors alive, as though defying his demand by their very existence. "Your way," she said softly, "has left him restless, crying in the night, longing for arms that calm him. My way gives him peace." The billionaire's face flushed red. "Peace? He is an infant. He doesn't know what he needs. I know. I am his father. I am master of this house. And you," he pointed sharply at her, "you are a servant who forgets her place." The words cracked through the air like a whip. Eleanor's lips parted, as though to speak, but she hesitated. The butler shifted uncomfortably. The silence afterward was suffocating. Nia's eyes darkened, but her voice never wavered. "Where I come from, master, there is no shame in being a servant if the service is love. But there is great shame in being a father who cannot hear his own child." The billionaire staggered back half a step, her words cutting deeper than he expected. "Watch your tongue," he warned, though the bite in his voice was thinner now. Nia turned slightly, loosening the cloth so Eleanor could see the child's serene face. The baby breathed evenly, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with Nia's. "This cloth," she said, running her fingers gently over the fabric, "is more than fabric, it is history. It carried my grandmother across fields when she worked the soil. It carried my mother when she walked miles for water. It carries me now, and through it, I carry him. Every thread is a promise that no child should feel alone in this world." The room stilled. Even Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes drawn to the weave of the cloth as though seeing it for the first time. The billionaire scoffed, though his voice trembled at the edges. "Poetry and sentiment. That's all. It has no place here, not in this house, not in this family. Civilization requires order, not fabric stories." Nia met his gaze unblinking. "Civilization without compassion is only a cage built of gold." The butler coughed into his hand, trying to disguise it as politeness, but everyone knew it more than that. The billionaire's authority slipped further, the edges of his empire crumbling in the very room he once ruled. Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but carried more weight than he had ever heard from her before. "She is right." The words landed like a blow. The billionaire turned sharply, his face twisted with disbelief. "You dare side with her against me?" Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but she did not back down. "I side with the truth. Look at him." She gestured toward the baby, still in perfect peace. "When has our son ever looked so safe, so content? Not in the arms of nurses, not in the cradles we bought, only with her." The billionaire's pulse thundered in his ears. His empire, his wife, his staff, even the calm silence of the child, was aligning against him. His authority was no longer unquestioned. "Enough!" he roared, his voice cracking under its own weight. "You think I will be undone by a cloth? By a servant?" But even as the words left his mouth, he felt the hollowness in them. They rang not with strength, but with desperation. Nia's eyes softened, almost pitying now. "You are not undone by me, sir. You are undone by your fear. Fear that the world is larger than you. Fear that love can come from hands you do not own." The chandelier trembled overhead, casting fractured light across the room. The words hung like judgment, undeniable, echoing in every corner. For a long moment, no one moved. The baby sighed in his sleep, as if closing the argument with innocence. The billionaire swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to lash out, to strike, to silence, but the weight of the room pinned him. He turned away, unable to meet their eyes. In that silence, his collapse began in earnest. The mansion was quiet that night. Too quiet. The billionaire wandered the long corridors of polished marble, the sound of his own footsteps echoing back at him like accusations. Normally, he took pride in the stillness of his house. It meant control, order, dominance. But tonight, the silence felt heavier, as though every wall remembered the words spoken in the drawing room. Civilization without compassion is only a cage built of gold. Nia's voice kept replaying in his mind, refusing to leave. He had dismissed her words in front of everyone, but in the echo chamber of his own thoughts, they returned sharper, cutting through the armor he wore. He entered his study and poured himself a glass of brandy. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted it, though he told himself it was fatigue, nothing more. The drink burned his throat, but it did not silence the unease that coiled in his chest. Down the hall, a sound broke the silence, the soft hum of a lullaby. He froze. The tune was low, rhythmic, carrying through the air like smoke. It was not a song he knew, not European, not something polished from the music halls, but raw, ancient, alive. He followed it, his steps cautious, as though intruding on something sacred. He found Nia in the nursery, rocking his son with the cloth still wrapped around her shoulders. She hummed as she swayed, her eyes half closed, completely at peace. The child stirred once, then nestled closer into her chest. Soothed by a world he could not name but already trusted. The billionaire stood at the doorway, unseen. For the first time in years, he envied someone. Not her freedom, but her wholeness. Why does he sleep for her and not for me? He muttered under his breath. The question was not anger but ache. A memory stirred, one he had buried under years of wealth and authority. He saw himself as a boy, no older than 6, standing in a kitchen that smelled of coal and bread. His mother, not the polished woman she later became, but younger, gentler, had tied him close with a shawl while she worked. He remembered the sway of her body, the hum of her voice. It was the last time he had felt completely safe. He blinked the memory away, his throat tightening. No, he whispered harshly. That was poverty. That was weakness. I built myself out of that life. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. It wasn't poverty that had soothed him. It was love. He retreated back into the shadows before Nia noticed him, his steps unsteady. Returning to his study, he set the half-empty glass of brandy down with a slam that cracked its base. He stared at the shelves of books, the trophies, the photographs of his empire. They looked smaller tonight, fragile, as if stripped of the grandeur he once believed eternal. Eleanor entered quietly. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. You saw them, didn't you? He didn't turn to face her. Saw what? The piece, she said simply, his jaw clenched. It's manipulation. She's giving him what neither of us could, Eleanor interrupted. Her voice was gentle, but it landed like a hammer. Love without fear. The billionaire finally turned. His wife's eyes were tired, but not defeated. There was a quiet strength in her gaze that unsettled him more than Nia's defiance ever had. You're taking her side, he accused. I'm taking our son's side, she replied, the words cut. For the first time in years, he felt as though his authority meant nothing inside his own home. He wanted to rage, to command, to demand obedience, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, and what of me? Where do I belong in all this? Eleanor stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. That depends on whether you keep clinging to power or choose to be a father. Her words left him hollow. He sat heavily in his chair, pressing a hand to his temple. The empire he built was cracking, not from outside forces, but from within. The cracks were not in his walls, but in himself. For the first time, he did not know if he wanted to repair them or let them break. The brandy glass tipped, spilling amber liquid across his desk. He didn't move to stop it. The gala was meant to remind the city of his dominance. The billionaire had spared no expense. Chandeliers glittered like constellations. Crystal glasses sparkled, and the air was thick with perfume and power. Men in tailored suits and women in jeweled gowns filled the grand hall, whispering his name with respect or envy. Tonight was supposed to be his night of triumph, the restoration of his authority. But beneath the music and the laughter, unease simmered. Eleanor moved through the room with grace, her face composed but distant. The butler's eyes darted nervously, as though anticipating disaster. And in the nursery, Nia rocked the baby in the patterned cloth, humming softly as though untouched by the world outside. The billionaire strode through the hall, commanding attention. His voice boomed as he raised a glass. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Tonight, you will see not only wealth and success, but the very proof of progress and civilization. My family, my legacy. Polite applause followed. He signaled to a servant, who opened the nursery doors. Nia stepped out, the baby tied securely to her back, fast asleep, wrapped in the bold colors of the kente cloth. The room fell silent. For a moment, the hush was reverent, as though the guests were witnessing something profound. But the billionaire's voice shattered it with scorn. "Behold," he said mockingly, gesturing at Nia, "this is what I must endure in my own home. A servant who insists on primitive customs, parading them as though they belong in my house of order." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some raised brows, others exchanged wary glances. But their eyes kept drifting back to the child, utterly peaceful. His small hand curled against the cloth. Eleanor's lips pressed tightly together. She had warned him this would backfire. Nia did not bow her head. She lifted her chin, the baby's breathing steady against her. Her voice rang clear, carrying above the murmurs. "This cloth," she began, "is not primitive. It is protection. It holds not only a child, but the generations who came before him. My people carried their children while building, while fighting, while surviving. This fabric is history. It is safety. It is love." The words flowed not as defense, but as truth, undeniable and alive. The guests listened, their skepticism shifting into something else, curiosity, even admiration. The billionaire laughed harshly, though his voice cracked at the edges. "Do you hear her? Folklore, dressed as wisdom. Civilization is built on progress, on leaving such relics behind. We are above this." But no one laughed with him. A woman in pearls whispered, but the child looked so content. A man in a gray suit nodded. "Healthier than most I've seen. Stronger." The billionaire's face tightened. He felt the ground slipping beneath him, the room no longer his to command. He tried again, louder this time. "Do not be deceived. This is nothing but a trick, a servant's attempt to elevate herself." Nia's eyes never left his. "If loving a child is a trick, then perhaps the world needs more tricksters." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Some even clapped softly, their hands reluctant at first, then firmer, bolder. The sound grew, polite applause, but applause nonetheless. Not for him. For her. Eleanor's gaze met his across the room. There was no triumph in her eyes, only quiet certainty. "You have lost them." The billionaire's chest tightened, rage and fear twisting inside him. His empire was crumbling not through scandal or betrayal, but through a truth he could not. Silence. The cloth, that simple piece of fabric, had become a banner of dignity, a mirror exposing the emptiness of his grandeur. He raised his voice one last time, desperate, trembling. "Enough! This is my house, my rules, my legacy." "But they—" Words rang hollow. The baby stirred at the shout, then nestled deeper into the cloth, unfazed by his father's rage. The room saw it, the contrast between noise and peace, between pride and love. And in that moment, the billionaire knew the crowd was no longer his. The chandeliers still glimmered, the glasses still sparkled, but the night had turned against him. His triumph had transformed into his unraveling, and all because of the woman he thought he owned. The mansion had never felt so hollow. The laughter of the guests was long gone. The chandeliers dimmed, but the billionaire still felt their stares, their whispered judgments. His empire of control had cracked in front of them all, and the image he had built for decades now hung in ruins. He stormed into his study, slamming the door so hard the shelves rattled. His reflection in the glass cabinet glared back at him. Red-faced, trembling, no longer a man of command, but a man cornered by truth. "They will forget," he told himself. "They will move on. My power will restore itself." But another voice whispered beneath the denial. "They saw. And once seen, it cannot be unseen." He poured himself brandy, then another, but each sip burned more than the last. His hand shook, the liquid sloshing against the crystal. For years, liquor had steadied him. Tonight, it only exposed his weakness. He staggered to the chair and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in years, silence pressed down on him like a weight he could not lift out, and then the memory returned. His mother's shawl, the hum of her voice, the sway of her body as she worked with him tied to her back. He had forgotten that warmth for decades, replacing it with money, with power, with command, but Nia's cloth had awakened it, dragging it from the shadows. His breath hitched. I buried it all. Why does it haunt me now? The study door creaked. He lifted his head sharply, anger sparking, but it was only the butler, holding the baby carefully in his arms. Sir, the butler said softly, his voice stripped of its usual formality. He will not settle unless. The billionaire frowned. Unless what? The butler hesitated, then confessed. Unless he is wrapped, as she does. A surge of rage shot through him. Get out, he roared. Both of you, out. The butler bowed quickly, retreating, but not before the baby let out a small cry. A fragile, aching sound that pierced deeper than any insult. The billionaire froze. The cry continued, small and desperate. He reached out instinctively, taking the child into his arms. The baby's face was scrunched in discomfort, fists clenched tight. The billionaire rocked him awkwardly, muttering, Quiet now. Stop this noise. I am your father. But the cries grew louder. He tried bouncing, pacing, shushing, but nothing worked. The baby wailed, rejecting his clumsy comfort. Then, without thinking, he reached for the cloth that Nia had left on a chair near the door. The bright fabric felt foreign in his hands, too soft, too alive for a man who built his world in steel and stone. His hands fumbled, but he remembered the way she had tied it, across the shoulder, looped at the waist, secure against the chest. Awkwardly, he mimicked it, clumsy but desperate. He placed the baby against him, pulling the cloth snug, and suddenly, silence. The child's cries faded into soft breaths, his tiny head resting against his father's chest. The billionaire froze, hardly daring to move. His heart pounded beneath the baby's cheek, and for the first time, he realized the rhythm wasn't just his own. It was shared. Tears stung his eyes. He had not cried in decades, not even at his father's funeral, not even when rivals tried to destroy him. But now, holding his son against him, bound by the very cloth he once despised, the dam broke. Sobs racked his chest, hot, raw, unrestrained. He pressed his lips to the baby's head, whispering through tears, I don't know how to love you. I don't know how to be enough. The baby stirred but did not wake, his trust absolute. The billionaire wept harder, clutching him tighter. He realized in that moment that all his power, his wealth, his empire, none of it had ever given him what this tiny being did. Acceptance without condition. Through the blur of tears, Nia's words returned. Civilization without compassion is only a cage built of gold. He looked around his grand study, at the trophies, the wealth, the emblems of power. They no longer looked like triumphs. They looked like bars. And for the first time, he wanted to be free. The baby's breathing slowed into steady sleep. The cloth held them together, father and son, broken pride and fragile hope. In that silence, the billionaire knew tomorrow nothing could stay the same. Morning light filtered through the mansion's tall windows, soft and golden, unlike the harsh chandeliers of the gala. For once, the house felt alive, not because of wealth, but because of the quiet breathing of a baby still nestled in sleep. The billionaire sat in the drawing room, the same place where he had once humiliated Nia, but today his posture was different. No longer rigid, no longer towering. His eyes were tired but clear, his hands folded in front of him, resting on the same kente cloth that had carried his son through the night. The doors opened. Nia entered, cautious but unafraid, her gaze steady. Eleanor followed, watching silently, as though knowing the weight of this moment. The billionaire rose slowly. For a long time he said nothing. Then, with a breath that seemed to empty years of arrogance from his chest, he spoke. I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air like a miracle. Nia blinked, surprised but unmoved. For what, sir? For everything, he admitted. His voice cracked raw. For mocking what I did not understand. For silencing truth I was too proud to hear. For thinking wealth made me greater when it only made me smaller. He stepped forward, holding the cloth out toward her. His hands trembled, but not from anger this time, from humility. This cloth. It held my son when I could not. It gave him peace when all I gave him was noise. And last night, it held me too. It broke me, but in breaking me, it showed me how to be whole." Tears shimmered in Eleanor's eyes. Nia took the cloth gently, her fingers brushing against his. "It was never the cloth alone, sir. It was love. Love carried in it. Love carried through me. That is what your son felt." The billionaire swallowed. Hard, his throat tight. "Then teach me. Teach me how to carry him. Teach me how to be the father he needs." For the first time, Nia's expression softened into a faint smile. Fatherhood cannot be taught by words, only by surrender. If you can lay down your pride, the rest will follow. He nodded, tears slipping down his face. He did not wipe them away. At that moment, Eleanor stepped forward. "Let us start again, as a family, not as master and servant, not as power and obedience, but as people who love the same child." The billionaire looked at his wife, then at Nia. His empire, his rules, his legacy, all of it seemed hollow, compared to the weight of this new truth. For once, he let go. He turned toward the open door, where the butler stood watching with quiet reverence. "Gather the staff," the billionaire said. "I have something to say." Minutes later, the grand hall filled with maids, cooks, footmen, all standing nervously in their uniforms. They had never seen their master this way, stripped of authority. His voice uncertain but sincere. He raised the kente cloth in his hands. "I once thought this was a symbol of weakness. I see now it is strength, not just for a child, but for a man who has forgotten what love is." He paused, scanning their faces. "From this day forward, this house will not be ruled by fear or arrogance. It will be carried by compassion. And I will begin with myself." Gasps rippled through the staff. Eleanor clasped her hands, pride and relief glowing on her face. Then, the billionaire did something no one expected. He draped the cloth over his shoulders, tied it clumsily as Nia had once done, and placed his son against his chest. The hall fell silent. The baby stirred once, then settled, breathing softly, his tiny hand curling against his father's heart. The billionaire's voice broke as he whispered, loud enough for all to hear, This is my true legacy." Applause erupted, not polite, not forced, but genuine, rising like thunder. Some staff wept openly. Others smiled with a freedom they had never shown before. Nia watched quietly, her eyes glistening. She had not won by rebellion or defiance, but by holding to dignity, to tradition, to truth. And in the center of it all stood the billionaire, no longer a man of stone, but a man reborn, carried not by power, but by love.